Hello and welcome. It's Dr. Brian Hargrove, and welcome to our discussion today on the most amazing structure of the human body, our skull. Today, we're going to explore the ins and outs of the actual skull as we talk about two distinct regions, in particular the cranium and the facial bones. We're going to look at the 22 bones that make up the actual skull, and then we're going to talk about how they articulate with each other and held together by these amazing structures called sutures. I look forward to exploring the ins and outs of the skull with you today, and let's begin. Let's first look at the cranium. Here's a 3D model of the cranium as we look at the anterior view of the frontal bone in orange. As we shift to the lateral view, moving to the right, we're going to see the right parietal in purple. We're going to see the right temporal in green and the sphenoid bone. Continue to move towards the very back. We have the occipital in light blue. Then we move to the left parietal in dark blue, left temporal bone, and the sphenoid. All these bones together make up the cranium. Now, when you have the opportunity, please pay attention and go back over each individual bone in its entirety as we go through the multitude of different views to see the total of the 8 bones of the actual cranium. Now that you've had a chance to look at the 3D model, let's look at the actual bones themselves. We have the frontal bone. We have the supraorbital notch on the frontal bone. We have the 2 paired nasal bones. And then we have the maxilla. That actually makes up parts of the facial bones within itself. Then we have a process here called the zygomatic arch. Makes up the zygomatic bone, makes up the parts of the lower part of the orbit of the eye. We have the red lacrimal bone. We have the ethmoid bone in yellow, and then towards the back we can see the green bone, the sphenoid. And we're going to change to the lateral aspect, moving towards where we're going to actually see parts of the frontal bone in light white up there. And we're going to point to that again. Then we get into the structures of the parietal, 2 paired parietal bones. We have the temporal bone in yellow here, the sphenoid that we can see, and then we have the zygomatic bone, making up the perspective aspects of the cranial bones. Let's explore a 3D model of the facial bones. We have 14 in total. We have the right maxillary bone that's in purple and the right zygomatic in white there. As we can transition through the parts of the 3D model, we can see the left and right zygomatic. We have the 2 paired nasal bones. We have the lacrimal, and then we have hidden in the back the ethmoid and the other side parts of the actual sphenoid bones themselves. Then we have the paired palatine bones on the hard palate on the bottom. And as we kind of rotate through these, we're going to go through all 14 of these in nature, and we're going to kind of look at these in more detail. Let's look at the bone models of the actual facial bones. Let's start with the maxilla, number 7. I have 2 paired bones there. And then let's point to number 9. Those are my nasal bones. And then we have the zygomatic bone over here to the right. Let me shift this a little bit for you can actually see what's going on. And the first one I'm going to point to, that little bone in the back that's kind of hidden, that is my ethmoid bone, and next to internally in there is the lacrimal bone. And let's shift back to the anterior aspect. We have a little bone toward maxilla called the vomer, and then we have the superior and inferior nasal concha that are inside the actual nasal area. And then shift to the left. Again, I have my ethmoid bone I can see over there, maxilla again, and then I have the zygomatic bone, and then I have a couple of structures we're going to look at later on. Let's look at sutures. There are several sutures that I want you to know. Let's orientate ourselves on the skull cap. We have my frontal bone in orange, and then right through here we have my sagittal sutures that fuse between the parietal and the frontal bones. Then we have the structure that runs in the crown between the parietals. That is my coronal suture. And then we have the occipital bone towards the back, and I have my lambdoid suture. Now that we've had the opportunity to go through the 3D models and the disarticulated parts of the skeleton, let's kind of try to put everything together to allow you guys to get all the bones down. Again, we have the skull in front of me. This is the anterior view. We have the lateral view, and then we have the posterior view. And then we have the components. We start talking about going from superior to the actual inferior aspects that are on here. Now let's first kind of focus in on the actual frontal part, or the actual anterior parts kind of going through here. Again, we have my frontal bone in purple in this particular case. We have the two paired nasal bones up front, and then we have the maxilla that makes up the structures or parts of those facial bones. We have the zygomatic process, or the zygomatic bone, that transcribes over to going to the letter aspect. We have the temporal in yellow, then we have the sphenoid in green, and then we have the paired parietal as we kind of work our way through the back. And then we get to the back part kind of going through here. We have my occipital with a little bump in the back, external occipital protuberance. Then we work our way back around through. I have the other parietal on that particular side, temporal, sphenoid, zygomatic arch, and the zygomatic process that's composed of both the temporal process and the zygomatic process to make up the zygomatic arch. And then we have the zygomatic bone. Going back around to the front again, we have the frontal nasal bone, structure of the maxilla. We have a little notch kind of on the very front up here, guys. That's called the vomer. And then we have the superior and inferior nasal conchas, respectively, in the middle. And then if we kind of go through, we're going to actually take the opportunity and zoom into the actual orbit of the actual eye itself. A couple kind of openings that we have. We have the supraorbital notch, and then we have the little mental foramen down here, and then we have infraorbital foramen, particular for these particular ones.